All right, so hi again. So this is our second part of self-paced reading lab. So in our previous lecture, I talked about what self-paced reading is, when should we use that, and what is the general algorithm of self-paced reading method in psycholinguistics research. So let's start this part. So in this part, we are gonna talk about the ingredients of our, let's say, Excel file. But before that, let's talk about the common ingredients of our CSV file. As always, there are some fixed columns, so we need an index column, an item number column. We need an item type column. We might put practice, experimental, or filler. We usually code our conditions, for example, condition 1, condition 2, condition 3. So you'd better have it in your Excel file. And then you should also have the number of lists, because in this study, for example, we had 4 lists. And then you'd better have the column which specifies which list you have used for this specific participant. So these are our fixed column, as you can see in this Excel spreadsheet. So the index, item number. So for example, in our study, we had 32 experimental item mixed with 64 let's say filler items. It should be 96, but you can have more filler items. So here we have 98. And then we have item type column. You have filler, experimental. As I said, you can have practice too. And then condition. So by condition 5, because we have 4 main conditions, so condition 5 is means that it is a filler item and not an experimental item. And then everything is list 1. All right, so it's crystal clear. Let's continue. Now we insert each independent variable of our study into a new column. For example, in our study, we had 2 independent variables, if you remember: gender of the antecedent, masculine or feminine, gender of the pronoun, masculine and feminine. So we add 2 separate columns to the Excel, and we label them as our independent variables. It should be something clear, for example, antecedent underscore gen, or pronoun underscore gen, which is the short form of gender. And now we should turn back to our pseudo-randomized list of items that we have already made, which we discussed in previous part. If you haven't seen that video, please refer to part 1 of self-paced reading lab and review what we said there. So for each experimental item, we put the proper condition from the pseudo-randomized list under independent variable columns. So imagine that here, for example, in our list, item number 3, which is an experimental item, it has condition number 1, or masculine antecedent, masculine pronoun. For item 98, which is an experimental also, the condition number is 3, and condition 3, for example, is feminine antecedent, masculine pronoun. And yeah, and these labels are identified by looking at our pseudo-randomized list of items to see, for example, item 3 matches with which condition. And then we put the condition here, the description of the condition here. All right, and for filler items, because these variables are not applied, are not applicable to filler items, we usually put NA for filler items. But you can use any other descriptions. All right, and now it's time to insert different regions of each item into our file. So to do so, we need separate columns for each region. So in our study, we had 6 regions. So we make 6 new columns at the end of our columns. And then the region content goes under the relevant column, as you can see here. And for filler items, we should divide our sentences in the same way, and the content of each region should go under its relevant column. All right. Yeah. And our input file is now ready. This is something mandatory for all self-paced reading tasks. But there are some important points. First of all, as mentioned before, PsychoPy, or let's say Python in general, is very sensitive to spaces in name of variables. So don't use a space in the header or label rows. Instead of having space, try to use capitalization or underscoring between the words. So instead of having item space type, just use item underscore type or item type with no space in between. And the condition names should also be the same across the items and across the list. What I mean is that, for example, if you pay attention to this example, a spreadsheet. So for example, for pronoun gender variable, one level is masculine, all in lowercase. Another level is masculine with capital M. So in data analysis, R or Python or whatever other statistics program that you are going to use, they think that we have 2 different levels. That's why you should be careful about the variable or the level names that you use in all items and all of your lists. The other problem that you might come across is when you are making experiments in other languages, especially right to left languages. And the problem is that PsychoPy might not recognize other languages, and that's why they might not show the content of the regions appropriately. To solve this problem, you need to make the content of the regions in PowerPoint first and save each slide as a JPEG file. And then you need to insert the image name, as you can see here, under an appropriate region column. In other words, instead of having the content or the text of each region in these cells, you should refer to the images that you have taken and saved in your folder. That's why it's very time consuming, and you might be very careful. You might double check your work, because sometimes you might have named the JPEG files wrongly, or again, you might have problems in spelling, or even the extension of the files. Anyway, so if you are using this method, you should spend a lot of time, but it is doable. And sometimes you need to include a comprehension check question or statement at the end of each trial. For example, after reading the main trial, participants should answer a question. For example, in this case, who was crossing the street? If John was crossing, press P. If Jack was crossing, press Q. So if this is the case, you need to add a new column to your Excel spreadsheet. Name it like comp underscore Q, and then put your questions under this column. And then if there is a correct response, you can also add a new column to the end of it. Label it like something like core underscore resp, which means correct response, and then put the correct response under this column. The important point is that you should put the option, let's say labels, under this column. You shouldn't put the option content. So we shouldn't put John instead of P here, or we shouldn't put Mary instead of P here. We should put P or Q. All right. And there are, of course, different ways of showing the content of each region through self-paced reading method. In this lab, I introduced one of them. If you want to use other ways, the procedure is similar, but you should make some minor changes in your file. And the other important point is that self-paced listening tasks are exactly similar to self-paced reading tasks. The only difference is that under region columns, you should insert name of audio files, as you can see here, that you have already recorded and saved in the folder. But again, you should be very careful, double check your audio files, double check the names and spelling, because it's time consuming. All right, now our input file is ready. Think about the PsychoPy file. Try to build a sample PsychoPy file for a self-paced reading study. And then in the next part of our lab, we discuss how we should make a real PsychoPy file. Thank you.